Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Housing Ombudsman Centre for Learning podcast. I'm Anthea Chilton, and I'm one of the sector learning and development leads here. And today I'm joined by Mark Smart. Mark's our Head of Casework Excellence and Development, and we're going to be exploring wider orders, talking about what they are, how they work, and the circumstances in which they might be used. But before we get into all of that, hello, Mark, and thank you for joining me. Would you like to start by telling us a bit about your role and what you do here?
Hello, Anthea, and to everyone listening to the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here talking about wider orders. As you said in your introduction, I head up our Casework Excellence and Development function, which is responsible for designing new casework products and services for the organisation, embedding a culture of continuous excellence, and leading the reviews function, which deals with challenges to our casework decisions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. It's really good to have you here. So let's get started right at the beginning. When we talk about wider orders, what do we actually mean and what makes them different from the other types of orders that we issue?
So in September 2023, under the Social Housing Regulation Act, the Housing Ombudsman acquired a new power to order landlords to review policy or practice where our investigation identifies a flaw in policy or practice that could lead to further similar complaints from other individuals. So these orders go beyond providing redress to the individual who complained to us, benefiting a larger group of residents, potentially all the residents of the landlord in specific circumstances, hence why we use the term wider orders to distinguish them from the other types of orders we make following an investigation. So this power is enshrined in the Housing Ombudsman scheme.
Thank you. I think that point about the orders going beyond the individual complaint is really important. But as you've hinted there, these aren't something that we apply in every case. They really are used in quite specific situations. So could you talk us through the kinds of circumstances in which a wider order might be considered to be appropriate?
So wider orders typically involve significant undertaking for a landlord to demonstrate compliance. We'll only consider a wider order where the identified failures could lead to further complaints from other residents that we consider are likely to lead to findings of maladministration. So our aim is to target wider orders at the most appropriate cases and landlords to maximise the impact of our powers. I'll explain some of the criteria on which we make a wider order so you can understand the difference between them, those and the other orders that we issue. So where there's a failure in policy, including an absence of policy where we think there should be one that could give rise to further complaints, if there's a disconnect between policy and practice, where the landlord had an appropriate policy in place but the practice was not in line with it, and we'll only consider a wider order where we find maladministration or severe maladministration, where the identified failures in policy and or practice are likely to have a significant impact on other residents or properties, or a significant number of other residents or properties are likely to be affected. And the findings of the investigation and proposed orders justify oversight for the landlord's governing body. But if we know the cause of the landlord's failures and the actions required to put things right following our investigation, we wouldn't include a wider order. Also, if the landlord is subject to a further investigation, had a similar wider order in the last 12 months, or the identified failures are in relation to the landlord's complaint handling policy, we wouldn't issue a wider order in those circumstances.
Thank you. I think that really highlights just how carefully the decision to issue a wider order is made. So once that decision's made and a wider order is issued, what does it actually look like in practice? So what are the key features of a wider order that would set it apart? And ultimately, what makes a wider order well suited to tackling issues that go beyond the individual complaint?
So wider orders should be exploratory and seek to identify why the failures occurred and whether other residents and or properties have been similarly affected. In most cases, a landlord's review of policy or practice under a wider order should be carried out independently of the service area responsible for the identified failures. So sometimes the landlord will opt to commission an independent organisation to carry out the review, and in other cases it will be a team outside the area of service delivery responsible for the failures identified in our investigation. Wider orders require landlords to set out the terms of reference for the review, including the timeframes, which need to be agreed between us and the landlord before the review starts. Wider orders also require oversight by the landlord's governing body, and we typically order landlords to conduct a review 6 months after we've confirmed compliance with the wider order, having received the landlord's report, and that's to ensure that improvements have embedded.
Thank you, that's really helpful. You mentioned there the importance of agreeing clear terms of reference from the outset. So that really underlines to me how structured these reviews are. To give listeners a sense of scale, could you give us a sense of how many wider orders we've issued so far?
Sure. Since acquiring the power in September 2023, we've issued just over 200 wider orders, either involving reviews of policy or practice, or in some cases, reviews of both policy and practice.
I see. So that's a significant number already. Looking across those cases to date, which kinds of issues have wider orders helped address? Are there any themes or patterns starting to emerge from what we're seeing?
We've issued wider orders covering quite a range of different subject areas, including damp and mold, living roofs, knowledge management information, and resident vulnerabilities. In a recent case, we found severe maladministration after the landlord made a vulnerable resident homeless and disposed of his belongings without his knowledge or consent. Following its independent review, the local authority landlord arranged training for all of its housing officers around communication and tenancy processes, and it used materials developed with its tenant panel to do that. It reinforced record-keeping practices and reviewed its tenancy agreement, and it committed to considering resident vulnerabilities in all tenancy-related actions. The landlord also introduced new processes for managing belongings left in properties, including cataloguing items and providing secure storage. So you can see the benefits of these changes for the residents, not just the individual in that case.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I think that really brings to life that example about the local authority landlord really brings to life how far-reaching the impact of a wider order can be. So, as you said, not just in terms of its policy, but in day-to-day practice and the outcomes for the residents as well. So, stepping back slightly, before the Ombudsman had the power to issue wider orders, how would we have approached situations where a landlord's policy or its practice needed reviewing?
So before we had this power, we could make non-binding recommendations that landlords review their policy or practice, which landlords were not obliged to enact, and we couldn't follow through with compliance. Now we can make legally binding and enforceable orders and ensure compliance with them.
I see. So that's a pretty fundamental shift from recommending change to being able to make sure that change actually happens. Once a landlord receives a wider order, I'd like to know what the process looks like for them in practice. Does that experience differ from what they'd be used to following for other types of orders?
So firstly, part of the wider order is for the landlord to draft terms of reference for the wider order review, which we need to agree before the landlord starts the review. Terms of reference need to specify the timeframes and the milestones, as well as identifying who will carry out the review. Like I said earlier, either an organisation independent of the landlord or a team independent of the service area responsible for the failures. So a wider order is effectively a root cause analysis designed to ensure the landlord identifies what went wrong, why things went wrong, and critically, what action it needs to take to put things right and minimise the risk of similar mistakes happening in the future. As part of a review under a wider order, landlords are typically asked to consider whether it's appropriate to provide redress or take some other action to resolve things for other residents who've been similarly affected by the failures identified. The landlord should then report back to us, setting out its considerations and the actions it has taken or proposes to take to put things right for others. Another distinguishing feature of wider orders is that they require oversight from the landlord's governing body and member responsible for complaints, and that's to ensure actions arising from the review have been completed or embedded.
Something that really comes through there is the focus on understanding why the issue happened in the first place and not just what went wrong and just treating those symptoms. That feels really important when it comes to making sure the right actions actually stick. And earlier you talked about the role of governing bodies and the importance of having that oversight. So when it comes to compliance, how does the Ombudsman make sure the actions required under a wider order are actually followed through? Are there any extra layers of scrutiny compared with standard orders?
Yeah. So the determination that we issue following an investigation stipulates the landlord should send the terms of reference for a wider order to us within 4 weeks of the determination for us to agree. And when agreeing the terms of reference, we confirm what adequate evidence of compliance should look like and what documents we expect to receive to confirm compliance. And this could include the landlord outlining how its governing body will monitor and provide oversight and that the actions arising from the review have been completed and embedded. In all cases, we expect the landlord to provide us with a copy of the review report, along with confirmation of any actions it has taken or proposes to take to minimise the likelihood of repeat failures. And the landlord should also provide details of any redress it has provided or intends to provide to other residents who've been similarly affected. And we also expect the landlord to provide a copy of the report to its governing body. Otherwise, compliance works in much the same way as for cases with other types of orders.
Thanks, Mark. So far, we've talked a lot about the process and the structure of wider orders. So I'm keen to hear about how this is all working in practice and the real world impact that they have, really. So, from what you've seen so far, are wider orders making a difference? Have you had any feedback from landlords or received feedback from residents about the impact of the reviews?
So first and foremost, wider orders are making a difference. They empower HOS to extend fairness to a far greater number of residents than we could previously through ordering landlords to improve policy and practice that goes beyond individual remedies. We've met lots of chief executives of several landlords who have received wider orders, and overwhelmingly their feedback has been really positive. They've welcomed these interventions and embraced the independent reviews as an opportunity to learn and see them as a catalyst for long-term improvements as part of their wider transformational programs. And it's reassuring to hear the impact that wider orders are having.
Yeah, I think all of that gives a sense of the impact being felt, and it's really encouraging to hear that we've had that kind of response from landlords. And thinking about what comes next, as wider orders become more established, how do you see them contributing to better outcomes for residents and to the sector more broadly?
Based on what we've seen so far with the wider orders issued to date, we anticipate the wider reviews of policy and practice will lead to tangible improvements across multiple areas of service delivery, which in turn should promote better outcomes for residents and hopefully reduce the need to complain about the service areas where improvements have already been made.
Well, that was my last question for you and feels like a really positive note to end on. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insights. It's been great to talk all things wider orders with you. And thank you very much to everyone listening. We hope you found it useful, and bye for now.